welcome to another edition of Streamtime Sports. I'm your host, Nick Meacham. Unfortunately, not joined by my co-host, Chris Stone today, who is on leave, but thrilled to be joined by another guest who we're going to have a really exciting conversation about his thoughts and also his business's approach to the sports industry. And one of them is probably arguably the most disruptive behind the scenes business over the last decade plus. So thrilled to be joined by Mike Falconer, who I believe is the Vice President of Strategy as the running title at the moment, Mike. So welcome to the Streamtime Sports, and good to have you back. Obviously you were on the show last year as well.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, great to be here again. Very much enjoyed our last chat. So looking forward to another 45 minutes or so.
Good stuff. Now, obviously we are at the start of the year of 2024. This podcast will probably be going out within probably the next week or two at the latest. We've seen a plethora of people making bold and unbold predictions and so forth. I'm curious, firstly, Mike, what's your sport of choice? Do you have a real sport that stands out to you as a sport that you follow religiously or quite passionately, or are you more of a jack of all trades like me?
Well, a bit of a jack of all trades, but certainly, if when forced to make a real choice, it's football or soccer, as I'm increasingly calling it when I'm out in the US. But it's the sport I mainly played as a kid. It's still the sport I get most passionate about, although not as passionate as I used to, given that I'm a Man United fan. But yes, so I guess that's go-to, although there are certainly others. I mean, I'm starting to play a bit of paddle and a bit of pickle these days, and I have to say they are great new sports that I'm enjoying very much.
Interesting. Well, I think you might be one of our first paddle pickleball players on the pod. Just curious, what do you like about them? What's resonating with you?
Well, I like, they're actually quite different in a way, as much as they're kind of grouped as new, I guess, tennis-based sports. I mean, paddle is great because it's actually more of a cross between tennis and squash there. But they're both very social games. I think they're accessible. Certainly paddle, you need a bit more infrastructure, but you can put a pickle court anywhere. Our local tennis club has just chuck one on a bit of spare ground at the back. So I think they're great for kids. I think you can play a reasonable game without a particularly high kind of proficiency level. So I like them, and I play with my son quite a lot, and we have a great time. It's they're great new sports, and certainly pickle in the US. We're doing some. We're talking to the PPA, the new Professional Pickleball Association, and the growth there is quite extraordinary. It really is, and they're taking a very professional, innovative approach to how they grow and market the sport. It's going to be fascinating, I think.
Yeah, for sure. It seems to be constantly being the talk of the town. They're very good at getting a lot of celebrities involved in the US, particularly involved. So it keeps coming across my various social channels. So I definitely have an itch to scratch when it comes to getting on the pickleball court at some stage and giving it a go. I have tried paddle, and the second time I played paddle, I got into it pretty quickly. And the rules are pretty good. If you've played tennis or squash, you can get into it pretty quickly. Yeah. But I started pulling my calf within about half an hour into the game. I thought this sport was supposed to be easy on the body, and I'm already pulling up sore. But
it can get pretty fierce. It really can. I mean, at a high level, my God, yeah. I mean, it's an extraordinary sport. You have to be incredibly agile. I'm not playing at that high level, so it's a bit more gentle,
Good stuff. Now, as I mentioned before, a lot of people making trends and predictions in and around the sports space. Mike, do you have one that sort of stands out for you that you're looking to track, whether it's in the sports generally or in the sports business, depending on what comes to mind?
Well, I'm going to keep it light, Nick. I mean, obviously, as a United fan, a watershed moment with Sir Jim coming in. I'm going to hope and forecast that he will trigger a return to glory at the Theatre of Dreams, and that finally we've got somebody who knows how to manage his way out of a paper bag running the club. So that's my hope and prediction for, if not 2024, then maybe 25 and 26.
Sounds good. I'm sure the fans will be definitely excited this season. A lot of cause for optimism, I am sure. Now, let's dig into the business side a little bit. Now, Sportradar is a business, as I said, that's not only been around for a number of years, but indeed had huge growth, huge impact across Europe and indeed across the US and across different sectors. Many people might know it for its betting expertise and prowess for those that are in the industry, but definitely has a much wider scope and impact in that, and has relationships with several major stakeholders. So, Mike, I guess if you were talking to someone in the industry, you met them either in a business meeting or in a pub or whatever it might be, to sort of set the scene about what Sportradar is today. Talk us through all those different key pillars and layers to the Sportradar business, and set the scene for us.
For sure. Well, you're right, Nick. 25 years of data and technology experience, certainly started within the betting sphere, and we built very deep capabilities at, I guess, as the foundation of the global betting markets. Certainly, if you look at the way betting practice is observed, as we see it now, a lot of it in play, a lot of it increasingly around kind of micro markets, and that is facilitated by the data that underpins it, of course, or certainly the data that underpins it, and then the ability to make a market around it, to put a price on an outcome, which is the two fundamentals for any sport. So over that evolution of betting, digital betting as we've seen it, we are the industry to some extent can only be as good as the data and pricing capabilities that we've been able to develop at a B2B level over that 25 years. So that is still the core of the business, but increasingly, because our relationships with different stakeholders has grown, we've got there are different constituencies with whom we work, betting operators being one, of course, but media owners, we supply a lot of content to them, rights holders. So we work with literally hundreds of rights holders around the world, from helping them with their integrity, for example, for building products and services that can help their own fan engagement. And we have attention now to a whole range of new and interesting areas that are fundamentally fueled by great data and technology capabilities, but that have much more diverse application. And funnily enough, we launched one of those just this week, a platform called FanID, which is first-party data marketing solution. So, as I say, it goes back to this core capability around data and technology, and how we can apply that through the sports ecosystem in a range of new, progressive, interesting, and ultimately valuable ways.
Absolutely. And I'm going to talk about the FanID side of things in a second. And just to paint a bit of a picture, you talked about the relationship you have with media owners, producing content, or servicing them with content. Could you just talk about what sort of content you're talking about there exactly?
Well, a lot of all the way from, I use the term media owner quite loosely, all the way from when you search on Google, for example, the content that is surfaced through Google will be provided by us. So if that's all the way down to score information, statistics, data, and a whole range of other useful aspects to what would constitute, an accurate Google search, all the way to the big US media who, with whom we have major significant relationships to provide a whole range of content, from audiovisual to data-driven content, that fuels really the sport that they publish. So, and everything in between. We our portfolio of content is increasing all the time, and of course, as we make more and more investments into data collection and what that can facilitate, computer vision and skeletal tracking as being, one example, the sorts of content and analysis and engaging means of interaction between sport and fan increases exponentially. So
let's talk a little bit about just your role, Mike. So obviously you said you've indicated you sort of spend a lot of time in the US. As someone who sits in the middle of this sort of business, which has a lot of different tentacles to it, let's say, or different pillars. Pillars is a much better word than tentacles. Just talk us through what areas, what's your remit there?
Sure. We have a new, I say new, probably formed in the last 3 to 4 years, a new vertical in the business called fan engagement. And as I kind of touched on a little bit, in terms of our desire and ability to build out of that core betting capability, it is focused on how we can facilitate and enable a whole range of different parts of the sports ecosystem to engage more capably with fans. And that can be anything from, we have a sports specific marketing platform that's part of that. We've got a fan identity platform, which is FanID, as I mentioned earlier. We have a whole range of what we call storytelling capabilities, which is largely content-based, but visualization, virtualization, and a whole range of other things besides. We have interactive capabilities, so ways and means of eliciting participation and interaction between often rights holders or media owners and fans, and then all the way up really through the what we call the value chain, if you like, to the point of where you can directly monetize fans through products that can enable fans to bet within streaming content, for example, to transact, buy shirts, merchandise, buy tickets, and a whole range of other things besides. So my role is to lead our strategic development within that fan engagement vertical. So it's new products and services. It's building partnerships with complementary businesses that can add to the capabilities we have internally. And it also includes acquisition, so buying businesses that we think can widen our capabilities usefully and give us the kind of scale and reach that we want.
So quite a diverse role there, Mike, by the sounds of it. Before we get into the FanID, but I want us to get to that, because I think seeing what it's all about is really interesting to talk through. But
sure.
Take a step back and talk me through what's the big challenge for the sports industry when you're talking to sports properties. What are you guys seeing that is the big hurdles that not only you're trying to solve with FanID, but just focus on what is those big channels they're still facing today in overcoming that relationship, or re-energizing, reigniting, getting best value out of that fan relationship? What are you guys seeing as the big problems, challenges they've got there?
Well, you're right. It's both problem and opportunity, which I think is the good part of it. And a lot of it starts outside the sports industry. If you accept sport as a form of entertainment, which it absolutely is, and you observe the high bar of expectation that other entertainment businesses, Spotify, Netflix, are starting to impose particularly around personalization and about the kinds of relevant experiences that you can provide in an individualized basis, then of course that bar has to be matched within sport when those consumers get to it. So there is, we think, and we want to take responsibility for building the platforms that can enable that, first of all. So you can have a Spotify-like experience within sport. You can have a Netflix experience within sport. You can have an Amazon experience within sport. So that underpins it on one hand, just our desire to bring sport up to the kind of levels of capability, digital capability in particular, that you see elsewhere. The second aspect is a little more challenge, and it's one that we universally face, and that is there's a different view on privacy, of course. So if you want to engage any kind of consumer, be they a sports fan or not, you have to abide by this new regulated view on what constitutes privacy rights. And of course, GDPR are driving that, but you look at CCP in California, and increasingly in China, India, South Africa, there is a GDPR-like regulation framework that is coming to play. So that's the kind of second factor, and of course that is probably as seismic a change as we've ever seen within the digital landscape. The basis on which the internet kind of operated, which is a bit of a free for all up until GDPR decided to form itself. Has created a wholly different environment which you can or should engage fans now. Which of course is a chance for everyone. And of course, just I think last week, Google finally decided that on their Chrome browser, they would start to deprecate third-party cookies against a small percentage of them. But this is the first step towards pretty much wiping that capability out over the course of 2024. So very different landscape on privacy, very different expectations around personalization. So we saw that absolutely as an opportunity, because in part, rights holders are in a strong position. And if the world is going to first party data, so consensually given volunteered data, if you like, that consumers are happy to exchange because they see the benefit they'll receive in return. If we are moving to that kind of world, then of course it puts rights holders in a very strong position because of, they are the first connection really between sport and fan. They are the governors of the sport, and they, to a greater or lesser extent, sit on, very large bodies of data around who fans are, what fans want, what fans prefer, what their allegiances are, all that kind of thing, which is of high value and increasingly high value. And so we thought, okay, well, if that exists, what rights holders are failing to or struggling to do at the moment is actually to apply that, to use that meaningfully and to monetize that. So FanID, as we get on to talk about it, is our direct response to that changing privacy environment, that deprecation of third-party cookies is the kind of technical result of that. And then the opportunity for rights holders and for brands, their sponsor brands and partners, to build a much more productive, constructive relationship around first-party data. So, and all of that is designed to create that kind of experience that consumers are increasingly used to on Spotify, Netflix, Amazon, and others. So, and we thought, that there aren't many businesses that would have the relationships, the scale, the data and technology capabilities to actually do that. And we almost felt a kind of duty to the sport. So, okay, look, we want to invest in this because we think that because we're B2B, because we work with everybody, because of our kind of neutral role in the ecosystem, if you like, we thought we were very well suited and had all of the right capabilities to deliver that platform. And that's really what FanID is all about.
Sure. So we'll jump into FanID in just 1 second, but I had a question in regards to first-party data. So we hear a lot of talk across the industry about the use of data to inform decisions. But when I speak to rights owners across the industry, they still struggle to know what to do with that data. There's actually more data now than ever before, and actually they almost have too much data at their fingertips. Obviously, you guys are great at understanding and deciphering what to learn and take away from that, I'm sure. But why is first party versus just pulling third party data from all the platforms that are also a lot of sports properties spending a lot of time on, your social media platforms, for example? Mm-hmm. Why is first party data really so valuable? What can you actually take from it that you can't really get from looking at sort of all the behavioral information you can get from a third party platform?
Well, yes, and there's another, just to confuse the question, there's another category of data called zero-party data, which is a kind of subset, if you like, of first-party data. And we talk about zero-party data as real kind of insight data. What are my preferences? What do I like? And that's data that's volunteered, if you like, on a opinion basis. So that gives real depth to first-party, which is essentially identity data. It's who you are, your email address, your phone number, the basis on which we can communicate with you individually. Zero party then is really the richness around that in terms of what kind of individual are you? So and to your question though, the value of it is first of all because third party information will not be able to be used in the same way it has historically. So immediately first party data takes on greater importance, but probably more positively than that, it's consensual. It's part of that value exchange between consumer and entity, in this case, rights holder. And therefore, there is a kind of quid pro quo that's understood, I think, between fan and sport. And I think, there's lots of data to support this. If, asking the question, if you can improve my experience, then, would you be willing to provide levels of first and zero party data? And the answer almost, always is yes. So long as you respect and satisfy, their demands. As soon as you start to exploit that, then of course that value exchange changes and that consent disappears. So that's the beauty of first party data, is that it is it's a willing two-way relationship between marketeer, in this case sport, and fan.
So it's not just even the access to the information, it's the fact that there's actually an intent shown by fans and audiences to transact with you or have a converse with you, I suppose, online, which I think is an interesting take on it, actually. I never thought about it like that.
Well, I think that's increasingly important. That the internet has to now abide by that, of course, because that's really what GDPR is trying to facilitate. But at the same time, it does create a very positive relationship. There are, of course, still people fearful of how data is collected without people knowing it. Lots of kind of issues over who's my Alexa, is it listening to everything I'm doing? And, you have a conversation with someone in a room and then suddenly on your Instagram feed, you've got an ad for something. So there is still a lack of, I think, full trust, if you like, around how data is used. But on that first party basis, and particularly in sport, where we are talking about a very high passion, high interest environment, then I think if you say, look, I'm going to tell you who I support, my favorite player, what I like to buy, when I like to go to games, and if you can curate my experience around your sport based on the fact that, then that's good for me. And I think that positive, very active relationship between data owner and data giver, I think is a really positive and certainly significant change within the way we work, not just in sport, but in all areas.
Good stuff. So, Mike, let's dig into FanID for a second. So, you guys have created this product, this offering that you guys see as a real way of changing the way. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm going to try and put words in your mouth, Mike. But
sounded good so far. Yeah,
changing the way sports are able to collate all that information and that relationship with fans and turn it into something where they can get a more holistic profile and view of the fan, the individual fan, whether it's anonymized or otherwise. I'm guessing. So, correct me if I'm on the right path, and take me down the nuts and bolts of what FanID is. Let's talk through, get into the weeds a little bit of the product, I suppose.
Okay, let's. I think I've referred to it. It's a first-party data marketing platform, but it does a number of different things, and there are kind of 4 pillars to it. So I'll talk you through each of those briefly. The first one is really data collection. It's this question we're asking, whilst, as you say, rights owners will sit on quite often a large body of data. It might not be particularly useful data. It might be old data. It might be erroneous data, and it might not be very deep data. So just knowing who someone is one thing. Understanding what they like and want is a whole different question. So we in our collection pillar, we help rights holders build a better body of data. So that's either more scale or more depth, if you like. So it just gives them a bigger, more valuable value asset, if you like. And also, of course, a much better understanding of their own fans, which any sport would see as a huge benefit. So that collection piece is important, regardless if you're the NBA or the Pickleball Association, whatever level of maturity. Then I think you would always want to be improving your data scale and depth. So that's the first part. Second, then is, okay, how do you connect that data? What do you start to do with it? Sitting on a massive data warehouse of data is one thing. And we hear this a lot, actually, particularly amongst the big leagues. And this was part of our diligence for FanID. This came through on a kind of recurring basis, that we've got lots of data. We can't really utilize and activate it in the ways that we want to. So now there was a technology that emerged over the course of the last 2 or 3 years as first party became more and more important. And views on data sharing changed. Companies that were historically competitive or suspicious of each other suddenly decided, look, in this first party world, we better get our heads around the idea of actually sharing data, where it's mutually beneficial. So, and what emerged technologically were things called data clean rooms. And these clean rooms were started to be built in order to provide safe, I say privacy safe environments where data can be shared, if you like, between multiple participants. So again, within our thinking around FanID, we thought, okay, well, what sport needs? It needs a sport specific data clean room, and we're going to build it because we saw them emerging in other environments. But we thought, look, the sports ecosystem is so big and so different, if you like, than something built for the industry, where rights holders, media. And when I say rights holders, rights in amongst themselves, so leagues, teams, players, even media owners, sponsors, brands, commercial partners. So data clean rooms where around a specific sport, their respective data sets can be connected and shared, but whilst abiding by all privacy regulation, which is what data clean rooms do, we thought, okay, that's going to be a very useful platform. So a year and a half ago, we started building that, and that's our, we collect, we connect, and that's a really important part of FanID is the way through this technology we call confidential computing, that without compromising anybody's data sovereignty or anyone's data security, we can share data. So they're not actually sharing all the PII data, but we are able to see commonalities across the data or differences across the data. So if there's a identity and an insight that's held by a sport team, and an identity and insight that's held by one of their sponsors and one of their media owners, we can connect all that together. So you build a much richer profile around that specific individual. And that is, of course, high value to everybody. So that's the second bit, which is data connection. Then, of course, you've got to do something with that. It's great, again, to have connected it, but how do you activate it? So, and this is just as important, is how do you take that data to market, so to speak? So if you have that individual and you have that rich profile, how do you find them? Not just on your owned and operated platforms, which is relatively easy, okay, because they'll come to your app or your platform. How do you find them in the wider domain? So how do you allow a brand to tell a story around a sport to an individual on Meta or in the wider web? Well, you do that through our sport-specific marketing technology, or activation technology, which is built to find individual fans wherever they may be, and to engage them on an individualized basis based on that profile that we hold, that connected profile we hold. So we can tell really interesting stories to individuals based on their preferences, so around a specific team or player, connected to all the event data we have. So based on how they're feeling on, their team might have just won or lost. We might know they're in this, close to the stadium. We might know they've bought a ticket for the next game. So we have circumstantial and insight data, behavioral data that we can combine together to serve content and messaging that's very relevant to what the message sender wants to say, but also that's very relevant to the individual's circumstances. So that's activation. So data collection, data connection, data activation, and then the piece that binds it all together is this layer called data orchestration, which is really a decisioning engine that, based on enormous number of considerations around who wants to send the message, what's the fan doing, what are the circumstances, who's perhaps paying. Those factors are assessed in order to orchestrate the fan experience so that it is curated in the way that the sport would want it. So it's not, as I say, it's not exploiting a fan. It's respecting the demands and requirements of all of the parts of the ecosystem. So it is a huge, great decisioning engine that makes sure that the fan experience is as good as it can be based on all of these insights we have around them. And that what we call responsible data custodianship is an absolutely crucial part of this, because you could exploit that kind of data to the extent where you start to sully the fan experience. We sit entirely the other way, in the sense that this is solely about curating the fan experience to the point where it does match that which they're getting on Spotify and Netflix and those other forms of entertainment. So it's absolutely value add. It's personalized. It's not exploitative. It's measured in how the experience unfolds, but importantly, very relevant and very personalized.
Super interesting. So there's quite a bit of complexity, unsurprisingly, given data is complex to begin with, and then there's a lot of moving parts, as you've talked about, with the changes in rules and regulations. The last point about the curation, the output, I suppose, of what's happening in the engine room and the orchestration that's happening. Where does that output come? So are you typically serving that through owned and operated platforms? Is there through email? What are the different ways you're basically delivering those messages?
All of the above, and that's the beauty of it. So it could be O&O, it could be email through your CRM, it could be a push notification, it could be on in a social environment, it could be on the wider web, it could be on mobile, it could be in stadium, it could be on digital out of home, it could be, wherever the fan might be on their journey and whatever device they might prefer. We will understand that, and that's part of the decisioning engine. So that we're not just matching what they like, we're matching how they behave from a device point of view, or where they are in the customer journey, you would call it conventionally, in and around sport. But we'll understand what they tend to do, whether they're people who watch on CTV or whether people are more inclined to go to the event or get together in a pub and watch whatever, will understand or will understand those environmental issues, I guess, or the circumstantial issues sufficiently where we can serve something that's personalized to that particular individual.
Interesting. Well, one of the things I hear when I talk to people about data and platforms and technology is when you start talking about clean rooms and warehouses and data lakes and CRMs and CDPs, it can get a little bit confusing. And even I have a feel for those and a base understanding, but then once it gets a bit too detailed, I get a bit lost. So just could you talk us through where does this sit within that mix? Is it replacing, is it a conglomeration of some of those types of tools, or is it something that sits completely separate?
I think the simplest way to see it at the moment is that it's a layer that kind of sits on top. Now, I think that will change over time because increasingly data clean rooms are a relatively new technology. And in fact, not all data clean rooms are the same. Some are pretty basic. Some are highly sophisticated. And it won't surprise you when I say that ours is highly sophisticated. But what I mean by that is that the things that they can do, I mean, just things like number of participants could be in a clean room, first of all. It differs, widely, and other factors besides. And as I say, not all clean rooms are built on this confidential computing basis, which is really where you get absolute, what we call zero trust. So everybody in there can be 100% satisfied that their data sovereignty is protected. So, as I say, the level of sophistication around clean rooms is changing, and I think you might see as that evolves that they're. So, okay, let me answer the question. What was it? So at the moment, it's a layer. So it would sit on top of a CDP or a data warehouse. So we go to League, who, of course, all have pretty sophisticated or certainly at a major level data warehouses, CDPs. That would be an input into the clean room. So we would go through a process of onboarding their data, the first party data into the clean room as the basis for it. And we do the same with all the other participants, basically. So, and that would be fed in through their different data sources. So we're not at the moment looking to replace anyone's data warehouse, quite the opposite. Although, as I say, that over time might change as clean room technology develops. But I think at the moment, it's safe to see it as a layer that really allows you to extract much more value out of your data. I mean, there is a kind of cleaning and validation process as it goes into the clean room. So what you tend to end up in the clean room with is something that's better prepared, more accurate perhaps, that's, got rid of duplications, those sorts of things. So there is a beneficial process just by getting data into a clean room. But at the same time, with really good data warehouses, it sits on top as a basis on which you can then start to connect. That's the key for the clean room. It is a data connection platform, and that's where we think the magic really starts to happen.
So when you're looking at this type of offering and trying to provide a centralized view, I mean, it sounds fantastic. It's a big challenge the industry's been facing for a long time. What sort of organizations is this for? You talked about the big leagues who are very sophisticated and they can plug in their various offerings and services into it. But what about the smaller sports properties that maybe don't have as complex data, information, teams, etc.? Do you see this as something that can service all levels, or is it mainly targeted towards the top tier for now?
We do actually, and one of our intentions really was not to make this difficult or expensive for any rights holder. So inevitably, a lot of our conversations at the moment are kind of more major league level, certainly. But anybody sits on a body of data, or in fact, if you don't sit on a body of data but you want to start to build one, then that collection pillar is crucial. That's your starting point. Build some scale, build some insight, and then you've got a value asset then that around the sport that you can then start to use in different ways. So the actual process of building, because the idea will be is that there'll be a clean room per sport effectively. So that's really what we want to do is to build that ecosystem specific to that sport. So, but if it's a kabaddi or a fairly niche sport, they still have fans. They can still have their own clean room specifically into which all of their constituent partners can get involved. Sponsors, media, they'll all have them to some extent. Teams, players, whatever it may be. we're not prescriptive on who those participants need to be. We're just saying, look, here's a platform for, if you have data that you can bring it to the clean room, we will connect it and turn it into something that has value as far as its application is concerned.
Interesting. So what sort of information from a tracking perspective is Google giving people access to now that once they do start turning off those taps more and more, that they will not be able to get access to because of that?
So it's already third party trackers. That is, so Firefox and Safari, probably 2 to 3 years ago now, as part of GDPR regulation, said, okay, third-party trackers we're not going to use anymore, basically. So these are little bits of code that, as the name suggests, are put on websites by third parties that observe your behavior, that track your behavior. And they're at the point that they weren't consensual. So the view of GDPR is, look, we don't want to do that anymore. But if someone's data is going to be tracked, which is why, of course, now when you hit websites, you're asked for consent around how you want your cookies managed. But and those bits of code, I mean, Firefox and Safari deciding to deprecate them was one thing, but of course, Chrome is 70% of the world's browsing traffic. So, and they said, "Yep, we're going to do it as well in 2022." And then, obviously, the industry ran off trying to find solutions. Didn't quite find a solution. Google started a sandbox trying to kind of find a way of I guess, creating an environment that wouldn't demean their commercial opportunity, because there are implications for Google, but that abided by our new view on privacy. And they just, we haven't really got there yet. So they deferred it 2-3 times. They've now said 2024. And as I say, they took that first material step in January. So third-party cookies will no longer be viable. And therefore, if you want to engage people and find people and observe people, you'll have to do it in a different way, and that therefore has to be done on a first party databases where you might be subscribed or you might be logged into a media owner. You've given data voluntarily. That's first party data that can be used to build profiles. But the idea of independent third party trackers observing your behavior is over, or certainly will be by the end of this year, to all intents and purposes.
So, Mike, one of the things that people will be looking to see from not only something like FanID, but Indeed are always trying to do, particularly on the business side, is to drive more value from the fan relationship, particularly commercially, because that's one of the big areas is that many people see the sports industry is kind of working with a leaky bucket a little bit in terms of its relationship and how it generates value in return, whether it's engagement, whether it is revenue. Do you see that things like, how do you see that, I guess, the benefit of providing a much more personalized experience, effectively using something like a FanID proposition, how that impacts things like revenue? Have you seen any examples of that yet that you can say, look, we're seeing that if you do more personalized, there's an increase in engagement and that's turning into revenue somewhere along the lines? Or is there still sort of a work in progress that a lot of sports are just still focused on engagement, audience, engagement, and then just hoping the maturation of things like e-commerce can start playing a role as and when it matures, and platforms like on social media as well?
I think it's still an open question in terms of what increment, what difference will hyper personalization, as we call it, make perhaps in sport, because we're still, I'd say, that there is certainly a lot more to come. Hopefully, part of it facilitated by FanID. But if you look at McKinsey studies, or you look at those businesses, consultants businesses that have tried to measure, let's call it the generic or the universal impact of personalization, they've tried to quantify it. McKinsey, I think, I haven't referred to the report for a little while, but I think they talked about over $1 trillion of value in the next 5 years being delivered by increasingly or increased personalizations, certainly. Now, you need to get into the report to work out how they built that up. But, McKinsey don't tend to, put out these kinds of numbers without it being logically substantiated. So I think there is just there's a given hypothesis, let's say, because I think it still is, although a lot of that $1 trillion will have started to have been, I think, realized by now. There is a hypothesis that great personalization equals better customer relationship, and that equals better customer lifetime value, as a simple kind of hypothesis. And if you look around, I mean, again, don't want to keep going back to them, but Netflix with their 76,000 micro genres, you've got Spotify, who I think can create a personalized experience for every one of their 450 million, subscribers, and they're both businesses with maybe some kind of doing pretty well, and I guess the ultimate measure will be Amazon, just in terms of how they, at that more mechanical level and that commercial, transactional level, have demonstrated what personalization can do for business growth. So I think we take it as a given, but I think, and it goes back really to that exchange, I would say, in that, so long as you improve my customer experience through relevance, thought, curation, all the things that we enjoy, then I think ultimately it's a quality game. So if the quality increases, my willingness to pay for that or pay more for that, it increases at the same time. So I think that's a reasonable supposition for us to make. I mean, if you were, I'm sure, if you gave me a couple of hours, I could put together some more tangible material examples of how streaming subscriptions might have increased on, from a rights holder's point of view, based on the way that they've been curated or the way that they've been marketed. But I mean, certainly, I think it's a reasonable basis to assume that there is significant incremental value to everybody in the ecosystem if we can deliver these sorts of personalized experience that I think consumers now demand.
Interesting. So looking, I guess, more widely, we started the conversation about talking about sort of trends in the industry, trends generally for 2024. But I want to take it back to now what you guys are saying specifically on like the fan engagement and fan consumption side. Are there really any key trends, Mike, that you're seeing that are really interesting with regards to whether it is consumption of content, whether it is engagement, monetization, etc., that the industry should be getting a little bit more excited about, basically, that you guys might be, or that you guys might just be tracking over the next 12 months now that you've got more access or more insight now?
Yes, for sure. I mean, close to home, one of them certainly is, and I think we talked a little bit about it before, Nick, about this convergence of media and betting, or let's widen that even, and the introduction of different types of transactional activity within streams. The merger between those two things, I think, is a very interesting environment. Of course, from a betting point of view, we're vested in that development. But you start to look at what ESPN Bet might be thinking, what Fanatics Bet might be thinking in terms of starting to make correlations between fans in different walks of their life, whether it's media consumption or betting or buying merchandise and whatever it may be, and using the real estate of sport, if you like, through a stream or whatever it may be, to monetize that content more effectively, or at least to keep that transactional component integrated into much more closely integrated into the sporting experience. So I think we are seeing and we'll start to see more of that as the market develops. I mean, I think from a broader broadcast point of view, I mean, certainly, computer vision, AI, and the data points that can now be collected to create really interesting, very different and innovative viewing experiences is again something selfishly we're vested in, but it is definitely coming. We're starting to see the early output from that, but I think we can expect the broadcast experience to change, I think, very significantly over the course of certainly the next couple of years, and I think there'll be plenty of examples of really good, interesting new ways of engaging with sporting content over the course of this year. So those are two for sure that we have a very close eye on, of course, and hopefully a part of the solutions that are going to enable it.
One of the things I want to just get to before we wrap up, I want to talk about is that you talked about data and sort of the augmenting the streaming experience in particular.
Yeah.
I've seen a couple of different examples of that. Just talk us through what you guys are doing, particularly how you're using data, not only in the streaming experience in terms of populating real-time or near real-time information and data and insights, perhaps in with broadcast partners, but more how you're using data to then create a new almost piece of content that is in real time that you're working with, I think, a variety of partners on.
Exactly. Well, it all goes back to your kind of digital twin. It's the data you can collect, and when we talk about skeletal tracking, compared to what we were doing, a few years ago, the sheer number of data points that we are collecting now, and to create, let's call it a digital twin, that then opens the doors to a whole range of different visual experiences for sure, because you can then. I mean, not one of our examples, but what Sony did with Roblox, for example, and the NHL, very interesting because they're effectively taking a digital twin, they're creating a Roblox experience around a particular game, and and by doing so, they're introducing the sport to an age group that probably wouldn't, have engaged with a conventional stream, because they're wrapping it in sort of language and content that they like. So, I think. As I say, but it goes back to that root data that you're collecting, and that's really where we are absolutely invested at the moment, is building the infrastructure to collect the kind of data where you can pretty much produce whatever you want. So you can reversion your sport through, as I say, through the clothing of things that different demographic groups want. And I think that's a really interesting dimension. Also, of course, though, just in terms of how you can change the way you enjoy the core experience, viewing angles, replays, graphical detail that just helps you understand a sport as it's happening. Of course, it facilitates a lot of that as well. So it's a really exciting area. I mean, I don't name names, but I think Nick, we're working with a number of major rights holders in and around this question. And I think, the output that's going to generate over, a relatively short period, I think is a really exciting prospect for sure.
Exciting indeed. I remember hearing over the years, a lot of people say that data is boring, but actually I think it's probably one of the most exciting parts of not only our industry, but indeed society today. So Mike, it's definitely been a really great insight into not only what you guys are doing at Sportradar, but indeed what areas that the sports industry has to be focusing on if they really want to build a true relationship with fans. From all the people I've talked with, it is a constant challenge that they wanted to keep improving. So, thank you for giving us an insight into what you guys are doing. And thanks for everyone for listening in. And obviously, if anyone wants to learn more about the FanID concept, there's obviously information across the Sportradar's various communications channels. Obviously, reach out to me and or to Mike, and I'm sure we can send you some information as well. Thanks very much, Mike, for joining us.
Fantastic, Nick. Appreciate it. A lot of fun.
Before you go, myself and Nick would just like to thank you for tuning into this episode of Stream Time. If you found the episode insightful, please make sure you like and subscribe on whichever platform you listen to. As a growing podcast, we'd greatly appreciate your support in sharing or writing a review. Ultimately, we want this podcast to not only entertain you, but also hopefully help you navigate the digital sports landscape. If you have any feedback on previous episodes or any topics and speakers you'd like to hear from in the future, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find myself and Nick Meacham on LinkedIn or on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @SportsProChris1. Nick can be found @SportsProNick. Of course, if you want to stay fully up to date on the sports business news cycle, please make sure to visit the Sports Pro Media website or sign up to one of our several newsletters to make sure you don't miss anything. Once again, thank you, and we look forward to you joining us next week on the Stream Time podcast.